This is my true story. After all my years of work, sacrifice, and loyalty to my family, I never thought my own son would humiliate me. I gave him everything, my savings, my time, my strength. But one night at the dinner table, he looked me in the eyes and said, "You're just a burden who eats for free." Everyone laughed, but I stayed quiet. My heart broke, but my mind became sharp. You won't believe what I did next that changed everything. Before I tell you, please comment where you're watching from, and please don't forget to subscribe so more people can hear my story. I was not born rich. I was not born lucky. Every dollar I ever had came from sweat, pain, and long years of labor. I started working when I was only a boy, carrying heavy boxes in warehouses, cleaning machines in factories, and later working shifts that sometimes lasted 16 hours straight. My hands were cut, my back was bent, but my will was strong. I promised myself that when I had a family, I would give them a better life than the one I had. And so, every day I worked with that promise in my heart. When my son was born, I felt like the world had given me its greatest gift. I held him in my arms and swore I would never let him suffer the way I had. I worked 2 jobs just to make sure he had food, clothes, and a safe roof above his head. When he was in school, I skipped meals so he could have money for books, uniforms, and extra classes. I told myself, he will go further than me. He will not have to taste the bitterness of poverty like I did. When he grew older, I paid for his college. It was not easy. Tuition was expensive, and I was already an old man with a weak body. But I sold land, I broke my savings, I even worked weekends in construction just to cover the bills. While other men my age were enjoying retirement, I was still carrying bricks, still climbing ladders, still pushing my body past its limits, all for my son's future. I thought that once he had his degree, his job, his stability, he would look back and say, "My father gave me everything. I will honor him." And when he finished school, I helped him get his first car. He needed it for work, and I did not want him struggling. I paid for that car in full, while I myself walked to places or took the bus. Later, when he married, I gave him the down payment for his first house. I remember handing him the check, his hands shaking, his wife smiling, and I thought, this is it. This is my reward. I am building a strong family, and in my old age, I will have respect, care, and love. Even after he was settled, I did not stop supporting him. I invested in small businesses for him. I gave him access to my accounts so he could manage things. I thought it would make his life easier. I thought it was a gift of trust, a father showing his son that he believed in him. To me, money was never the point. Legacy was the point. I wanted him to know that everything I earned, every cent I saved, was for him and his family. I never saw my wealth as a weapon. I saw it as a bridge, a way for my son to cross into a better life. But respect did not come. Gratitude did not come. What came instead was silence. What came instead was distance. What came instead was the cold truth. My son had taken everything I gave him for granted. He did not see my sacrifices as love. He saw them as his right. He thought everything I gave him was not a gift, but something he deserved. And when a man feels entitled to everything, he loses respect for the hand that gave it. Still, in my heart, I waited. I told myself, he is young. He is stressed. He will see my love one day. I excused his short words. I forgave his rolled eyes. I overlooked his dismissive tone. I thought time would heal, but time did not heal. It only exposed the truth more clearly. To him, I was not a father who built his life. I was just an old man in the corner, a mouth to feed, a body to ignore, a burden to carry. And yet, I must remind you, everything he had, everything he touched, everything he stood on, was mine. It came from me. It came from the strength of these tired hands, from the labor of this broken back, from the hunger of nights when I chose to starve so he could eat. He forgot all of that. But I did not. At first, it was small, so small that I almost convinced myself it was nothing. My son would sigh when I asked for help opening a jar. He would roll his eyes if I forgot something. He would say, "Dad, you're slowing me down," when I walked beside him. These were tiny cracks, and I told myself not to pay attention. But cracks, if ignored, always grow wider. Soon, meals at the table began to feel different. Where once there had been laughter and stories, there was silence or sharpness. If I reached for another spoonful of rice, my son would mutter under his breath, "He eats more than the kids." I heard it. I pretended I didn't. His wife would sometimes push her plate away loudly and say, "Maybe we should start portioning food better." And though no one said it directly, the message was clear. I was costing them too much. I remember one evening, the grandchildren asked me for a story, like they used to. I smiled and started talking about the old days, about how I carried bricks as a teenager to build schools, about how I once walked miles barefoot to work because the bus broke down. My stories were not fancy, but they were true. Halfway through, my son cut me off. "Dad, stop boring them. They don't want to hear about your struggles." The children laughed nervously, following his tone. My voice died in my throat. I stayed quiet, staring at my plate. The house no longer felt like home. The television remote was taken from my hands. The kitchen became a place where I felt like a thief if I reached for food at the wrong time. I heard whispers late at night. "He just sits around all day. He's not even contributing. Why is he still here?" These words were daggers, and though they weren't always said to my face, they cut deeper because they were true to their hearts. Even when I tried to help, it was never enough. If I folded laundry, they said I did it wrong. If I swept the floor, they said I missed spots. My son once left a list on the counter, chores written for me, like I was the house servant. Take out trash, clean bathroom sink, feed the dog. I stared at that paper for a long time. I, who built his future, who paid for his house, was now reduced to a man assigned tasks just to justify his existence. But I said nothing. I swallowed every insult like bitter medicine. I told myself, family is family. He doesn't mean it. He is just stressed with work, with bills, with life. I excused him, again and again, because I could not face the truth. The truth that my son no longer saw me as a father to be respected, but as a burden to be managed. One day, his wife told me straight to my face, "Maybe it's time you move to a senior home. They'll take better care of you there." I laughed nervously, pretending she was joking, but her eyes were cold. My son did not defend me. He only kept eating, silent. That silence told me everything. It told me I was already being pushed out, already being measured, already being treated as extra weight. And yet, I stayed. I endured. Because a father's heart, no matter how bruised, still hopes his child will return to love. I thought, he will remember. One day, he will see. One day, he will understand what I gave up for him. But instead of love returning, resentment grew. Instead of gratitude, I found myself facing contempt. And as I sat alone at night, I began to feel it too, the weight of being unwanted. The whispers were no longer whispers in my mind. They became truths I could not deny. My own son, the boy I carried on my shoulders, the boy whose shoes I shined before school, the boy I once gave my last piece of bread to, now looked at me not with love, but with annoyance. It is a cruel thing to be a father who gave everything and to realize slowly that your child thinks you gave nothing. That was the beginning, the first signs of resentment. And though I tried to ignore them, they were only the seeds of something far more cruel that was waiting to be spoken aloud. It happened during dinner. Just an ordinary night, or so I thought. The table was full. My son, his wife, their children, and me. I had cooked part of the meal earlier, chopping vegetables the best I could with my weak hands. We sat down together, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe we were still a family. I smiled at the grandchildren as they passed plates, and I reached for a small portion of food. I didn't take much, just a little rice and some vegetables. My appetite had grown smaller with age, but as I slowly lifted the spoon, I felt my son's eyes on me. His stare was not warm. It was sharp, cold, filled with irritation. Then, without warning, his words fell like a hammer. He said loudly, in front of everyone, "You're just a burden who eats for free." The words echoed in my ears. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. But then I saw the smirk on his wife's face, the way she looked at me as if I were dirt on the floor. Worse, I heard the small giggles from my grandchildren. They didn't fully understand, but they laughed because their father laughed. That laughter cut me deeper than a knife. My own blood, laughing at me. I froze. The spoon in my hand trembled. My eyes dropped to my plate. My chest burned, but my mouth stayed shut. I wanted to defend myself, to remind him of everything I had done, of every sacrifice, of every night I went to bed hungry so he could eat, of every dollar I saved so he could go to college. But the words would not come. I sat there in silence, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I looked at the food in front of me and thought of the times I used to carry home sacks of rice on my back after a long shift at the factory. I thought of the blisters on my hands from overtime shifts, from pulling double duty just to keep food on this very table. And now, decades later, in the house I paid for, at the table I built with my hands, I was called nothing more than a burden. The cruelty was not only in the words, but in the way the room joined in. His wife did not stop him. She didn't say, "That's too much." Instead, she looked at me with triumph, as if she had wanted those words said aloud all along. The children giggled. One of them, trying to mimic his father, even whispered, "Grandpa's free food." My heart cracked in that moment. The foundation of everything I believed about family crumbled. I stayed silent, but my silence was not peace. It was survival. I kept my head low, chewing slowly, though my throat felt tight and dry. Every bite tasted like ash. My son, proud of his cruelty, leaned back in his chair and laughed. "See?" he said to his wife. "Even he knows it's true." They laughed together. The sound rang in my ears like a cruel melody I could never forget. Inside my mind, memories flashed like fire. I remembered the time he was 5 years old, sick with fever, and I walked miles in the rain to bring him medicine. I remembered the time he was 17, when I pawned my watch, the only gift my father ever gave me, so I could buy him a new suit for his first job interview. I remembered carrying him on my shoulders to school when he was too tired to walk. Every sacrifice I made, every ounce of love I gave, came back to me that night as a slap across the face, wrapped in 6 words. "You're just a burden who eats for free." And yet, I said nothing, because I realized something important in that moment. Words are powerful, but silence, when used carefully, can be more powerful. I knew that if I responded with anger, they would laugh louder. If I defended myself, they would twist my words against me. So, I swallowed my pain, tucked it deep inside my chest, and let them believe they had won. But inside, something shifted. Those words planted a seed, not of despair, but of resolve. For the first time, I saw my son clearly, not as the boy I raised, not as the man I hoped he would become, but as the selfish creature he had allowed himself to be. And I realized he did not value me. He did not respect me. He only tolerated me because he believed I had nothing left to give, nothing left to take, no power left in my hands. That was his mistake. Because what he forgot, what his cruel words blinded him from, was that everything he had, everything he used, everything he depended on, still came from me. The house he slept in, the accounts he accessed, the money he bragged about, the inheritance he assumed would be his. It was all under my name, legally, financially, completely. He thought he was mocking a powerless old man, but in truth, he was mocking the very man who held his entire future in his grasp. I looked at him one last time that night. My eyes met his, and I gave him nothing. No anger, no sadness, no reply. Only silence. And in that silence, I began to plan. Because sometimes revenge does not need shouting. It does not need rage. It needs patience, a calm hand, and the sharp memory of 6 cruel words. You're just a burden who eats for free. That sentence became the beginning of his downfall. That night, after dinner, I went to my room quietly. No one followed me. No one asked if I was okay. I closed the door slowly, sat down on the edge of my bed, and stared at the floor. The words my son had spoken, "You're just a burden who eats for free," echoed again and again in my head, louder than any clock ticking. I could still hear the faint laughter of my grandchildren through the walls. Their giggles, once the sweetest sound in my life, now pierced me like knives. I sat in silence for a long time. The room felt heavy, filled with years of sacrifice and disappointment. On the nightstand beside me were old photos. My wife, gone now, smiling in her younger years. My son as a baby, his small hands clutching my finger. Birthdays, graduations, family holidays. I picked up one picture where my son was standing proudly in his college gown. My chest tightened as I remembered how I had worked double shifts to pay for that education. I remembered the calluses on my hands, the backaches, the countless nights I walked home in the dark after working late just to make sure he had a future brighter than mine. And yet, tonight, all that effort, all that love, had been reduced to one cruel sentence. As I sat there, I thought of the many times I had gone hungry so my son could eat. I remembered boiling potatoes and saving the biggest portion for him, pretending I wasn't hungry. I remembered stitching his torn shoes by candlelight so he could walk proudly to school, even when my own shoes had holes. I remembered paying his bills when he first moved out, covering his debts, and never asking for anything in return. I gave because I loved. That was all I knew. But love, I realized now, is not always repaid with love. Sometimes it is repaid with entitlement. Sometimes it is repaid with cruelty. I leaned back on the bed and closed my eyes. The room was quiet, but inside my heart there was a storm. How had my son grown into this? How had the boy I carried on my shoulders, the boy who once cried when he scraped his knee and called out for me, turned into a man who saw me as nothing more than an extra mouth at the table? Was it my fault? Did I give too much? Did I fail to teach him respect when he was young? These questions ate at me, but I knew the answers wouldn't matter. The truth was in front of me now. He did not see me as a father anymore. He saw me as weight. I rose slowly and walked to the mirror. My reflection stared back. Old, tired, lined with years. My hair was gray, my back slightly bent, my hands trembling. Maybe to him, I did look like a burden. Maybe to the young old age is nothing but weakness. But what he forgot, what they all forgot, was the strength behind those wrinkles. These hands had built a home. These shoulders had carried him through childhood. This back had bent for decades so he could stand tall. Every scar, every line on my face told a story of sacrifice and love. And yet, to him, I was just an old man eating for free. The anger inside me grew, but it was not wild or loud. It was slow, steady, sharp, like a knife being honed on stone. I realized that if I stayed silent forever, they would continue. Tomorrow, there would be more insults. Next week, more humiliation. Soon, I would not only be called useless, but perhaps thrown out entirely. I could not let it continue. I would not let the last years of my life be filled with shame and mockery. So I sat back down at the desk, pulled out a pen and a notebook, and began to write. Not a letter, not yet, but thoughts. I wrote down every memory of sacrifice, the money I spent, the nights I stayed awake for him, the times I bailed him out of trouble. I listed everything I had done so that I would never forget, so that when doubt tried to creep in and tell me to forgive, I could remind myself of the truth. I was not a burden. I was the reason he had everything. And then I thought of the future, the accounts, the investments, the properties, all still under my name. He thought they belonged to him already. He thought he was the master, and I was the dependent. But the truth was the opposite. I held the power. Quietly, silently, I realized the balance of control had never left my hands, and that thought gave me strength. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "He thinks I am powerless. He thinks I will stay silent. He does not know me at all." That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his mocking smirk, his wife's cold eyes, the laughter of the children. But I also saw my wife, her face kind and strong, the way she used to tell me, "Never let anyone take your dignity." She had always believed in me. She had always said, "Respect is not given, it is earned. And if they take it away, you must take it back." By morning, my sorrow had turned into resolve. I was done being humiliated. I was done being treated as a burden. I was done giving without respect. From that moment, I decided, if my son could not see my worth as a father, then he would feel my power as the man who still held everything he thought belonged to him. I did not need to shout. I did not need to fight. I only needed to act. And when I acted, it would be final. That night's reflection became the seed of revenge. A revenge not out of hatred, but out of justice. A revenge not with fists, but with silence, with papers, with signatures. My son had chosen to treat me as a burden. Now he would learn what it meant to lose the very foundation of the life he took for granted. The reflection ended with one clear decision. I would never forgive those words, and I would never let them go unanswered. The next morning, as the sun rose faintly through the curtains, I sat at the small desk in my room and opened my old briefcase. Inside were files and folders I had carried for decades: bank statements, investment papers, property deeds, insurance documents, and even letters from my lawyer. Dust had settled on some of them, but they were still clear, still strong, still mine. I spread them out slowly on the desk, one by one, like a general studying maps before a battle. This was the truth my son had forgotten. Everything he claimed as his, the big house, the family savings, the trust funds, the investments in stocks and land, none of it was truly his. Every cent, every brick, every legal signature was still tied to me. The accounts had my name first, my authority first, my control first. Years ago, I had allowed him access, not ownership. I had given him the keys, but not the lock. He had mistaken permission for power. He strutted around, treating me like a burden, mocking me in front of his children, forgetting that the very roof above his head was paid for with the sweat of my back. He thought the car in the driveway was his, but the insurance was still under my name. He thought the house was his castle, but the deeds still rested in my briefcase. He thought the accounts were his safety net, but the passwords, the legal rights, the final authority still belonged to me. As I looked through the papers, I remembered each sacrifice connected to them. That house deed. I had worked 40 years in factories, standing on aching feet, swallowing my pride under cruel bosses, just so I could one day buy it. That bank account. I had skipped meals, skipped clothes for myself, skipped holidays, just to save and protect the family's future. Those investments, I had studied, calculated, risked, and prayed late into the night so that when I grew old, my family would never suffer. And now? They mocked me. They called me useless. They told me I was just a mouth that ate for free. They had forgotten the foundation on which their comfort was built. But the documents in front of me reminded me of one thing. While they had forgotten, I had not. The power was mine, quiet, invisible, underestimated, but real. It struck me how foolish my son had been. He thought old age meant weakness. He thought gray hair meant stupidity. He thought my silence meant defeat. But he didn't understand that silence is sometimes the greatest strength. I had watched, listened, and endured. I had let him show me who he truly was. And now that I knew, I also knew exactly where to strike. I folded the deeds and accounts neatly back into the briefcase. I locked it and placed it by my bedside. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt calm. Not happy, not sad. Calm. Because I knew the balance had shifted. My son believed he had the upper hand. He believed I was powerless, dependent, trapped. But the truth was the opposite. With a few phone calls, with a few signatures, I could take back everything. I thought about his arrogance. I thought about how he never thanked me for paying his tuition, how he never acknowledged that I bailed him out when he fell into debt after a bad business venture, how he never even said thank you for the house he lived in. To him, it was his right. To him, I was just background. But now, I held the pen that could end it all. That morning, as the family bustled around the kitchen, laughing, eating, planning their day, I walked in slowly with my cane. None of them looked at me. My son barely nodded. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes, as if I were a shadow passing through. My grandchildren didn't even pause their games. I sat down quietly, watching them, listening. They thought they were the kings and queens of this castle. They thought I was a servant. But I smiled to myself, a smile so faint they never saw, because what they didn't know was that the king had never left the throne. He had just been silent. I whispered inside my mind, "This is not your house. These are not your accounts. This is not your security. It is all mine. And one day, very soon, you will remember that." The power was not in shouting, not in arguing, not in begging for respect. The power was in the papers, in the signatures, in the control they had forgotten I had. And with that power, I would show them the price of humiliation. For years, I thought love would protect me. For years, I thought respect would come naturally. But respect, I now knew, cannot be assumed. It must be demanded, or it must be taken back when denied. And so, as they laughed and ate their breakfast, I sipped my tea quietly and looked at each of them one by one. My son, arrogant. My daughter-in-law, cold. My grandchildren, mocking without even realizing. None of them knew that the ground beneath their feet was about to shift. That day, I did not speak a word. I did not argue. I did not show anger. I let them believe I was still broken, still silent, still powerless. But inside, I was already writing the ending of this story. An ending where I would no longer be the burden, no longer be the old man eating scraps. An ending where my son would learn that the man he mocked, the man he dismissed, still held the keys to his entire life. The power was mine. It always had been. He had only forgotten. But soon, he would remember. The next morning, I woke earlier than anyone in the house. The sky was still gray, the birds not yet singing, and the silence in the air felt heavy, like it was waiting for something. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the locked briefcase by my feet. Inside, it was not just paper. Inside, it was power. Inside, it was the weapon my son had forgotten I still held. For years, I had left those papers untouched, believing they were simply for security. But now I realized they were more than that. They were my answer, my justice, my revenge. I took a slow breath, then reached for the phone. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from age. Yet my voice was calm when I spoke. The first call was to the bank. I had spoken to them many times before, but this call was different. I gave my account number, confirmed my identity, answered all their questions. My name was still on every account. My signature was still the authority that mattered. My son had access, but access is not ownership. That was the difference he never understood. "I want to remove all secondary access from these accounts," I told the officer on the phone. My voice did not shake. I spoke slowly, clearly, like I was reading a command from a stone tablet. The officer asked me again to confirm. I did. Within minutes, my son's name and his wife's name were erased from the system. Their debit cards, their online access, their linked credit lines, all cut. Just like that, the world they thought they controlled was gone. Then I gave the next instruction. I want to transfer the full balance into a new private account under my name only. The officer asked me where I wanted it. I gave them the details. A secure account I had opened years ago, but never touched. They told me the transfer would be complete within the day. I thanked them and hung up. When I set the phone down, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Strength. Quiet, steady strength. For so long, my son had stripped away my dignity with words, with looks, with mockery. But in one phone call, I had taken back what he thought he owned. I had not raised my voice. I had not begged. I had not fought. I had simply acted. The second call was to my lawyer. He had been with me for decades, a man I trusted more than anyone else alive. I told him everything. I told him about the humiliation at the dinner table, the cruel words, the disrespect. I told him about the night I sat awake staring at family photos, deciding it was time. His voice was calm, steady, professional. He did not question me. He only asked what I wanted done. I want to rewrite everything, I said. My will, my trust, my estate, every single piece of paper that has his name on it. I want it gone. I want it clean. I want it final. We arranged a meeting for later that morning. I dressed slowly, carefully, putting on my best coat. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to walk into that office not as a broken old man, but as who I truly was, the man who had built, saved, sacrificed, and provided. The man who still owned everything. At the lawyer's office, we spread out the documents across the large oak desk. One by one, he pointed to the lines where my pen needed to touch. Each signature was like a stone lifted off my chest. With every stroke of the pen, I erased my son's arrogance. With every line signed, I removed his future from my legacy. He had wanted me gone. Now he was the one being erased. The money, the investments, the properties, all redirected into a private trust under my sole control. My son's name vanished. His wife's name vanished. Even the grandchildren's future claims vanished. Everything was mine again, fully, legally, without question. Then came the will. My lawyer asked softly, "Who will be your heir, sir?" I thought for a moment. Not my son, not the one who called me a burden, not his wife, who sneered at me every time I walked into a room, not their children, who laughed when I was humiliated at the table. None of them. I listed names of distant relatives, of charities, of people who had shown me respect when my own family had not. The money would go to them. The legacy would go to them. The house, the land, the investments, all of it. My son would be left with nothing but the memory of his cruelty. When the final document was signed, my lawyer leaned back and looked at me. "It's done," he said. I nodded slowly. For the first time in years, I felt light. I felt free. Not because of money, not because of revenge, but because I had finally answered the humiliation with action. My son thought he had stripped me of dignity, but in that office, with those signatures, I had taken it back. When I returned home, the family was still out. The house was silent, empty. I walked to my room, placed the documents back into the briefcase, and locked it again. I looked around the room, knowing soon I would leave it behind. This house, which I had built with my own hands, would no longer be my prison. It would be theirs, their nightmare, when they realized it was no longer theirs at all. That evening, they returned as usual, laughing, arguing, filling the kitchen with noise. My son barely glanced at me. He had no idea what I had done. He had no idea that the accounts he would try to use tomorrow were already empty. He had no idea that the house he called his was no longer his. He had no idea that his future had already been erased. I sat quietly at the table, sipping tea. They thought I was silent because I was weak. But my silence was strength. My silence was the sound of victory. The execution was complete. That night, as the house filled with the usual noise of my son's family, Laughter that was never for me, arguments that never included me, and whispers that always excluded me. I sat silently in my room, staring at the packed suitcase beside my bed. I had been preparing for this moment quietly, in small pieces, without anyone noticing. A shirt folded here, a set of documents tucked away there, medicine bottles placed at the very bottom of the bag, where no one would think to check. To them, I was invisible. To me, that invisibility became my shield. The house I built with my own hands, the one I worked for decades to pay off, no longer felt like home. The walls that once echoed with joy now echoed with insults and humiliation. Every corner of the house held a memory, some sweet, many bitter. I thought of when my son was a boy, running down the hallway with his arms wide open, calling me his hero. Now he walked the same hallway without so much as a glance in my direction, as if I were a shadow too stubborn to disappear. I could hear them in the kitchen, talking loudly, not realizing that every word carried through the walls. My daughter-in-law laughed about her shopping plans for the weekend. My son complained about gas prices, then bragged about how all this will be mine one day anyway. His words cut deep, not because of the greed, but because of the certainty in his tone. He thought I had no power left. He thought the future was already signed over to him. I looked at the briefcase on my nightstand, the one holding the fresh legal documents signed that morning. He had no idea his claim to this house, to my savings, to my entire life's work had already been erased. He had no idea that I had taken it all back. The thought gave me a strange sense of calm. I decided that night would be my last under this roof. I could not stay another day as their target of jokes, as their servant, as their burden. They saw me as someone waiting to die. They forgot I still had the strength to live. When the house grew quiet and the lights went off one by one, I sat in darkness, waiting. I listened to the ticking of the clock, to the faint sound of my son snoring in the other room, to the silence that followed. At midnight, I stood up. My knees ached, my back protested, but my resolve carried me forward. I reached for the suitcase and pulled it upright. It was not heavy, not compared to the weight I had carried in my heart for years. I slipped on my coat, the same one I had worn to the lawyer's office earlier that day. I opened my nightstand drawer and placed a single envelope inside. It contained nothing more than a blank sheet of paper. No words, no explanations. My silence would be the message. Walking through the house for the last time felt surreal. The hallway seemed longer, the rooms colder. I paused by the living room, where family photos lined the shelves. Pictures of my son's wedding, of birthdays, of holidays. I touched one frame, a photo of him as a boy on my shoulders, smiling wide. My fingers trembled as I set it back. That boy was gone. The man he had become had killed him long ago with arrogance and cruelty. At the front door, I turned the lock slowly, careful not to make a sound. The cool night air rushed against my face as I stepped outside. The driveway was empty. My son had taken the car out earlier, leaving only the old truck parked by the curb. I walked past it, clutching the handle of my suitcase, and did not look back. I had arranged for a taxi earlier in the day, calling from a payphone near the lawyer's office. The driver promised he would wait down the street at midnight, no questions asked. Sure enough, as I reached the corner, the dim headlights glowed in the dark. I opened the door, placed my suitcase inside, and lowered myself onto the seat. "Where to?" the driver asked softly. "The station," I replied. My voice was calm, steady. As we drove away, I looked out the window at the shrinking outline of the house. For decades, it had been my pride, my fortress, my proof that I had built something for my family. Now, it was just walls and bricks filled with betrayal. I felt no sadness leaving it behind, only relief. At the station, I bought a one-way ticket to a city far enough that they would never think to search for me. I paid in cash, using money I had kept hidden in a small tin for years. While waiting for the train, I sat quietly on a bench, my suitcase at my feet, watching strangers walk by. None of them knew who I was. None of them knew what I had just done. That anonymity felt like freedom. When the train arrived, I boarded slowly, settled into a corner seat, and placed my suitcase beside me. As the train began to move, I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I slept without fear of waking up to insults or orders. Back at the house, they would wake to find me gone. They would search my room, find the empty closet, the missing suitcase, and the envelope with nothing inside. They would panic. They would call. But the phones would never be answered. By the time they realized the accounts were empty, the house no longer theirs, and their inheritance gone, I would already be far away. Their arrogance would meet silence. Their cruelty would meet consequences. Their certainty would collapse into desperation. As the train carried me farther from them, I opened my briefcase once more and looked at the documents. The papers were clean, signed, final. They had laughed at me, mocked me, humiliated me. But now, they would learn that silence is not weakness. Silence is a weapon. I leaned back in my seat, watching the world outside blur past the window. I had vanished from their lives without a word, without a fight. My disappearance was my revenge. And it was complete. Morning came, and in that house I had abandoned, the routine unfolded as usual. My son stretched in bed, complaining about his back as his wife scrolled through her phone beside him. The children laughed in the kitchen, their voices sharp and careless. None of them noticed the absence of footsteps in the hallway, the missing sound of the kettle I usually boiled for tea, or the way the old wooden chair at the dining table sat empty. At first, my absence was nothing more than an unnoticed silence. But silence has a way of growing. When he finally went to my room, perhaps expecting me to bring him his coffee or to ask for breakfast like some servant, he found the bed neatly made, the closet doors wide open, and my drawers empty. My suitcase was gone. On the nightstand sat the envelope I had left, plain, unmarked, and holding nothing inside. He tore it open, expecting some explanation, or maybe even a confession. But the blank sheet of paper mocked him louder than any words could. It told him everything without saying a thing. It told him that I had walked away, not in anger, not in panic, but in complete control. At first, he tried to laugh it off. "The old man probably went for a walk," he muttered to his wife. But as the hours stretched and there was no sign of me, laughter turned to irritation, irritation to concern, and concern to unease. He picked up his phone and dialed my number. It rang, then cut off. He tried again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. His voice grew sharper. "Dad, where are you? Call me back right now." By evening, unease had hardened into frustration. He called again and again, 30 times in total. Each call unanswered, each voicemail more desperate. The children asked where I was, and for the first time, he didn't have a confident answer. He searched the house, the garage, even the garden shed. Nothing. I had erased myself as carefully as one wipes dust from a shelf. Then came the real blow. He tried to pay for groceries online, only to see the transaction decline. His wife attempted to use their joint account card, but the ATM rejected it. Confused, he drove to the bank, dragging his arrogance with him, and demanded answers. That was when the truth hit like a hammer. The banker, polite but firm, explained that all accounts linked to my name had been transferred, that his access had been revoked, and that his name no longer carried authority. "But I'm his son," he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. The banker adjusted his glasses and calmly replied, "Legally, sir, you are not entitled to any of these funds. The accounts are under your father's sole control. His instructions were executed this morning. It is final." His face turned pale. My son, who had once laughed at me and called me a burden who eats for free, now stood in a public bank lobby with strangers watching him unravel. His voice cracked between rage and panic. "This can't be right. He wouldn't do this to me." But deep down, he knew. He knew exactly why. When he returned home, his anger exploded like fire. He threw the empty envelope against the wall, cursed my name, and shouted at his wife, as though it were her fault for not seeing it coming. The children hid in their rooms, frightened by the sudden chaos. He tried calling me again and again, but his calls found only silence. I was gone, and so was the life of comfort he thought was guaranteed. The following days broke him in ways I had long predicted. He had bills to pay, loans to cover, and a lifestyle built on the assumption that my wealth was his inheritance. Without access to my accounts, the walls of his security began to crumble. His wife, furious, demanded answers, demanding how he could let the old man slip away with everything. Neighbors began whispering. They had seen me leave with a suitcase, seen the taxi at midnight, seen the emptiness in my window the next morning. Rumors spread quickly, as they always do. Suddenly, the man who once mocked me as useless was pitied for losing the fortune he never truly earned. Days turned to weeks. He tried reaching out to my lawyer, only to be met with formal responses and curt reminders. Your father's estate has been revised. You have no claims. He slammed the phone down each time, his rage echoing through the halls I once filled with laughter and patience. He tried to track me down, calling distant relatives, checking hospitals, even filing a missing persons report. But I had already disappeared into a place he would never find, and more importantly, a life he would never control again. In that house, the air grew heavy. No longer did his wife smirk at me, no longer did the children laugh at my expense. Instead, they lived with the consequences of their own cruelty. Meals grew smaller, bills piled higher, and tension filled every corner. For once, they felt the burden of life pressing down on them, the same burden they had mocked me for carrying all those years. Meanwhile, I was far away, sitting on a balcony overlooking the ocean, sipping tea slowly, without anyone rushing me, without anyone sneering at me. I could afford peace now, and I could afford distance. I had traded a house full of insults for a life full of silence. My son had traded his arrogance for nothing, and that is the truth of revenge. It does not always come with shouting or fists or loud confrontations. Sometimes revenge is quiet. It is walking away, taking everything with you, and leaving behind nothing but silence and empty hands. My son called me a burden who ate for free. Now he eats his words, and he does so with nothing left on his plate. Weeks passed in silence. My phone stayed off, my new address kept secret, my name removed from every place my son might search. He grew desperate, and desperation always eats a proud man from the inside. He called relatives, begged neighbors, even knocked on the doors of people I had not spoken to in years. Each time he asked the same question, "Have you seen my father?" And each time he received the same answer, a shake of the head, a shrug of the shoulders, or worse, silence. He did not realize that my silence was my shield, and my absence was my punishment. Then, when I knew his panic had ripened into misery, I gave him the only thing he deserved, a message not of comfort, not of reconciliation, but of truth. I did not call him. I did not write him with my own hand. I sent the words through my lawyer, so they would cut with the weight of law, not emotion. The envelope was stamped, official, impossible to dismiss. He received it one morning with the rest of his mail. Bills he could not pay, notices he could not ignore, and then the letter that broke him. He opened it, expecting maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, maybe even a plea to return. Instead, the words inside were sharp, simple, and final. You said I was a burden who eats for free. Now carry your life without my help. Goodbye. No warmth, no signature, no return address. Just the truth. Cold, sharp, undeniable. The letter did not scream, but it roared in his mind. Every word dragged him back to that dinner table, to the night he laughed while calling me a burden, to the moment my grandchildren joined in his cruelty. Now he understood what those words had cost him. He had traded millions of dollars, security, and respect for one careless insult. He had gambled my dignity against his arrogance and lost everything. He read the letter again and again, his hands trembling, his face red with rage. His wife hovered behind him, demanding to know what it said. When he finally showed her, her fury exploded. She cursed him, blamed him, told him he had ruined everything. Their voices rose so high the neighbors could hear through the thin walls. The children hid in their rooms, frightened by the shouting that shook their fragile home. For days afterward, he tried to reply. He wrote letters filled with excuses, apologies, and half-truths. He said he had been stressed, that he hadn't meant it, that he loved me in his own way. But none of those letters ever reached me, because my lawyer intercepted them all. He was instructed not to forward a single word. My silence was the reply to every excuse, every desperate plea. He also tried calling my lawyer, demanding meetings, threatening lawsuits. But the lawyer only reminded him, calmly and professionally, that every transfer was legal, every account secure, every document airtight. There was nothing he could do. My wealth was gone from his reach, sealed in places he could never touch. He could rage, scream, and curse my name, but he could not change the truth. He had been erased from my legacy, and it was by his own doing. The letter spread through the family like fire. Relatives whispered about it, neighbors speculated, and soon his shame was not just private, but public. Everyone knew what he had said to me. Everyone knew how I had answered. He could not hide behind his charm anymore, could not pretend to be the dutiful son. His own words condemned him, and my final message nailed them into the coffin of his reputation. Meanwhile, I felt no guilt. I did not rejoice, but I felt peace. My letter was not written out of hatred, but out of truth. A truth he needed to face, whether he liked it or not. A truth that said respect is not bought with blood ties, nor inherited with property. Respect is earned, and he had thrown it away like scraps from a meal. I simply made sure he lived with the consequences. For the first time in years, I slept without heaviness in my chest. I no longer wondered if he would insult me again, no longer feared the sting of his careless words. My letter had closed the chapter. He had cast me aside as a burden. I had cast him aside as an heir. Balance had been restored. And in that quiet room by the sea, as waves crashed against the shore, I whispered to myself, goodbye. Goodbye to his arrogance. Goodbye to his cruelty. Goodbye to the son I once loved, but who no longer existed. All that remained was a man stripped of wealth, pride, and comfort, left only with the bitter taste of his own words. That was my final message, not spoken in anger, not shouted in rage, just written once, sealed in an envelope, and delivered like a verdict. And like all verdicts, it could not be undone. When I finally closed that chapter of my life, I chose not to look back. I did not follow my son's misery, nor did I check to see what became of his household. I had carried them for years, through sacrifices, labor, and sleepless nights, and in return, I was handed humiliation. Now, at last, I carried only myself. With the money I had secured, I found a modest apartment in a quiet coastal town, far away from the noise of my old life. It was not a palace, but it was mine. The first morning I woke there, sunlight pouring through the thin curtains, I realized I was breathing without heaviness. No one shouted at me. No one rolled their eyes when I moved slowly. No one dared call me a burden. The silence was not empty. It was dignity. Each day began at my own pace. I would rise when I pleased, not when ordered. I brewed tea and sat by the small balcony, watching the ocean waves crash in steady rhythm. I walked slowly through the market streets, greeted by shopkeepers who called me sir instead of old man. For the first time in years, I ate meals I chose for myself, bought with money I controlled. There was no one to tell me to eat leftovers, no one to laugh at how much or how little I consumed. Food tasted different when it came with respect, fuller, warmer, almost sacred. In the afternoons, I read. I dug out old books I had carried from place to place, but never had time to enjoy. Now, I read every page with patience, letting the words remind me that life was still mine to live. Sometimes I walked to the beach and watched children play, But this time I was not longing for my own family's company. I had accepted that blood alone does not guarantee love. Respect makes family, and I had found that in strangers who smiled at me in passing. With my wealth safe in my own hands, I chose to use it wisely. Some went to my comfort: good clothes, healthy food, and a doctor I trusted. But much of it I redirected into quiet charity. I supported scholarships for children who wanted to study but had no means. I gave small donations to shelters that fed the hungry. I did it all anonymously because I was not searching for applause. I simply wanted my sacrifices to mean something for people who valued them, not for those who mocked me. At night, I slept soundly. No arguments behind thin walls, no laughter at my expense, no whispers calling me dead weight. Just the sound of the sea, steady and endless, reminding me that life moves forward no matter what storms tear through it. I never answered my son's calls. I never wrote back to his letters. He had taken my love for granted, mistaking it for weakness. My silence was the final lesson he would ever receive from me: that words can cut deeper than knives, and once spoken, they cannot be taken back. He had called me a burden. I had proven him wrong. And so, I live in peace. My steps are slow, but they are mine. My meals are simple, but they are chosen freely. My days are quiet, but they are filled with dignity. I am no longer bound to the cruelty of those who should have cared for me. Final thought: he thought I only ate for free. Now he will starve for the respect he threw away.